Hi, everybody. I'm Denise Markonish. I'm the Senior Curator and Director of Exhibitions over at MASS MoCA. And we've got with us today two fantastic artists, Vincent Valdez coming to us from his studio in New Haven, and Adriana Corral coming to us from Houston. Okay. I was like, I think that's where you are right now. Last year, Vince and Adriana were in a show here at MASS MoCA called Suffering from Realness, with a collaborative work that they did together. And through that, the folks at MCLA got to know their work and invited them to be part of this hostile terrain program. So I have a number of questions, and this conversation is going to sort of start here and spill over into the one next week. Is that next week? I can't remember. I don't have my calendar in front of me.
For 2 weeks.
Okay. So I wonder if it makes sense for you to both take a couple minutes just to introduce yourselves and your work.
Sure. Adriana?
Sure. Well, hello guys. It's nice to meet you, even though I can't really see you. My name is Adriana Corral. I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, but I would say that's where the root of my interests derive from. A lot of my work delves into human rights abuses and historical narratives that are not necessarily at the forefront of our knowledge, and creating installations or sculptures or wall drawings and immersive spaces to bring people in to kind of unpack those themes or events or histories that I'm interested in talking about. They're sometimes more meditative spaces, but it comes with a very rigorous research-based practice with a lot of investment in materiality and labor. And I see them as kind of these organic works that have different stages of life, and some are tangible and some are ephemeral.
My name is Vincent Valdez. I was born in 1977 in San Adriana and I are both from the Lone Star State. I am currently at the Next Haven Fellowship in New Haven, Connecticut. I landed here in January and will be here through May of next year. I'm primarily a painter. For me, drawing is absolutely key in order to understanding and becoming a good painter. I've been making images my entire life since I was a child. It's always been my intention to create work and offer it as a report. These works, in my own opinion, offer my visual testimony about a transformation or about a struggle for transformation, both love and survival in 21st century America.
Small topics, both of you, small topics. So I think, I wonder if you guys can both talk about, I was thinking about, Hostile Terrain is a project that is looking particularly at borders. And I think in a variety of ways that both of you have dealt with this in your work, sometimes the very specific US-Mexico border, but sometimes they're more mental borders or things like that. So I wonder if you can each talk about some projects that have, and also just both growing up in Texas and that hyper awareness of the border in both regions where you grew up. Yeah.
You want to go first since I went first last time?
Sure. We'll keep it symmetrical.
How about that balance? Yeah, I think, growing up in Texas for me, it was extremely evident at a very early age that you can't really escape the myth of the U.S.-Mexico border. I think especially particularly in a city like San Antonio, Texas, home of the Alamo, right? And so one of my very first, earliest experiences that really caused some sort of emotional and social and political stir in me was one of my first field trips to the Alamo in first grade. It's sort of this rite of passage for all young students in that city. And I remember walking in, and we spent that entire semester learning about this myth of what the Alamo represents, what it symbolizes, what it means historically, not only to the region, but to the entire narrative of the United States. And so we walked into that structure sort of with this prescribed notion of how we were supposed to understand its context. But as the group walked in, like I immediately ventured off by myself to the right and started wandering around, and I was drawn to this giant canvas. It was the biggest canvas I had ever seen, at that moment in my life, and this amazingly theatrical, epic painting of the siege of the Alamo, and extremely violent and dramatic. But I remember just standing there, dead in my tracks, because I was so confused about why every dead body that depicted the enemy in this epic painting looked just like me, right? And so the heroes, the glorified, sort of celebrated portraits on the canvas, the good guys, really told an entirely different story from my own American experience at that moment, or at that point in life. And so, yeah, I remember just being so confused and disoriented and disturbed by it, because I couldn't understand what that meant about my role in American society, my place, if people that looked like me were considered the enemy. And I remember in the school bus asking questions the entire way back, and my teacher just not being able to really answer those questions, and then just eventually got annoyed and told me to sit there quietly. And so ever since then, it's there's always been this sort of tug of war between the way that I perceive the myth of America versus the reality of America.
And
oh, go ahead, Dee.
I was going to say, are there any I'm thinking of something like the city. You're painting the city, and how that for me is really also about this kind of border that we don't perceive. I mean, all borders are essentially invisible until we make them visible. But that thing of imagining that the clan is not something that exists anymore. And so I wonder how you take that idea of the myth of America and bring it into subjects like that.
Right. So the reason I brought up that story is because it sort of it sparks my own curiosities, my skepticism about the way that America perceives the significance or the definition of what a border means, right? And so when I think of borders, I think about not borders, not in such a literal sense, but I think about borders between, as division, borders between classes, between races, between the way that our economic, political, and social structures are devised and upheld in this country. And so in moments or in works like The City, it's very much so my way of confronting the way that constructed mythic borders as part of our American psyche really rules our everyday existence in this country, right? And so you really don't have to look very far or dig very deep, especially at this moment in time in America, to see that really is something that is very true and accurate in this country.
Adriana?
Well, now a little bit older, there's a few things that I kind of hold with me, which all allude back to the line, and drawing these lines or these territories or these mental divisions, physically and mentally. But one is by Michael Taussig, and it's a line drawn is important not for what it records so much as what it leads you to see. Even like Carmen Herrera, who also said lines of sight, or the artist Gego, line is human. And these are kind of sayings that I keep with me, mainly because as a kid growing up along a physical border, that you saw an extensive change just in my lifetime. And going back and forth, there were certain moments then it became very physical, and very prominent, or it gave me an awareness to even political structures, trade, economics, who has opportunity, who has limited opportunity, and how all of these structures exist with being on the same landscape, right? But being operated by different countries, and seeing also it coupled with violence and the drug trade. And I think, having family who were born and raised there, politically involved there, it gave me again another sense of an awareness. When I first started to look into those dynamics, especially with a series of works that I did in reference to the feminicidios, which is violence against women, it was really trying to understand the magnitude of the kind of violence against women over there in Mexico, and how is it here in the US, but also seeing that our hands are in both, meaning that a lot of these women, whether young students or workers, are working in factories many a times and are the products that we consume. So seeing this, again, kind of going back to your question, Dee, is, looking at it from this local perspective, this national perspective, and then this international perspective. And seeing, where there's certain ideas to others, they don't necessarily see the borders because they're moving money, they're moving trade, they're moving what they need to move, right? Whereas then it's very physical on the ground to other people who are in labor or moving these actual things. And so I think, for me, again, going back to the line, it expands in so many different ways, down to whether it's the writing of names and how that can create a line, or drawing these actual physical lines into the space, carving them out, and trying to imbue those things into the work so that you're very conscious of your body and how your body operates in that space. Whether you're looking up, you're looking around, it's tapping into more of the sensorial aspect of your mobility in the space. And I think those are things that I'm always consciously aware of, especially, the way that I move through spaces, and just paying attention to those little details and trying to use those in the work.
You talk too a little bit about your research process. I know that's a huge part of what you do, and so much of the information that you find is information that you have to like dig deep and be really tenacious to get to. And I just wonder if you can talk about that process and why it's so important for you to just keep pushing that forward.
Yes, I think it's having a family who kind of infused that practice in me as well. It was like, if you have a question, go find it and understand why. And so I think what I kind of envision when I'm doing this research, it's almost like a little seedling is implanted. I see it very much like a greenhouse. And I have a lot of little seedlings where I'm very interested in very specific things, or they just resonate heavily with me and I want to expand on them. And so I may create a very organized framework of how I want to, okay, I need to go to this archive, I need to go to this location and do field work. I need to bring the documents or materials back to the studio, but I'm also very organically led, where people that I will meet will add so many layers to the work. And that being people who trust me with important documents or stories or experiences, and then tapping in deeper. So it's I feel as though I go a little bit deeper and then a little bit deeper. It just maybe one story or experience is leading me into another type of archive or an oral history. And so I'm essentially absorbing and reading, and then I can go into the studio and start unpacking this, filtering it through my lens, which is through a visual lens, through experiential, sensorial kind of experience for the audiences. But I think it's, I'm always collecting constantly, and I feel like an organized collection, if that Denise knows this.
Very organized.
But it's also having these constant conversations with people that I trust and I love, and who that's what elevates the work. And I think, especially like with Vincent, he is somebody who, we've always been in dialogue. We're constantly having these kind of conversations, and which is very much like Requiem. It was a very organic kind of way of union, like, or of moving together into this collaboration. It was organic. But we have such a strong sense of trying to understand what we don't understand. And even though we may still have more questions and still may understand to a certain level, I think the important thing for us is just to keep asking those questions, because, like for example, in this class, there might be a little seedling that sits with somebody who's like, I'm going to go write my thesis on this and I'm going to expand on this. And I think that kind of shared knowledge is really important.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Since you, all right, that brought up two questions for me. I'm trying to decide which one to ask first. The first one I think I'll ask is I like that you use the word that you absorb this information. And I know from so many conversations we've had, and so many texts that we've both read, things like Elaine Scarry's The Body in Pain, that holding that information, absorbing that, holding that within you as a way to try to correct the missteps of what gets told is something that you both do in your work. And, you know, I think it's one of those things that is both really important, but it's also can be a burden, to have to be the one to be telling this story and to feel like you need to hold it within you. So I wonder if you can both talk a little bit about why that's important for you as artists, and you know, what, and maybe talk about like one work each that you felt has, even through the pain of holding that in you, has then you've been able to release that by putting the work out in the world.
You want to go first?
I need to think about that one. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'd stump you at least once. I didn't send you that question in advance.
Go ahead.
There you go.
If there was one, that's tough.
You can give more than one example.
In all honesty, I'd say that 9 out of the 10 pieces, if I had to list 10, all embody, this sort of challenge of having to be the narrator, right, for these kinds of challenging issues that plague our, our modern world. I think that for me, I don't know that I necessarily feel a burden in terms of carrying these sort of heavy weights on my back, because it's creating the images that actually helps me to release that burden, right? If I didn't have this sort of as an outlet, I'm not really sure what the outcome would be. And so I'm very fortunate, I'm very grateful to be able to flush out what it is that enrages me. I think that if I did have to identify a burden, my burden is that I feel, daily, is trying to comprehend the fact that I'm still having to explain these subjects that I'm depicting to others who refuse to acknowledge that these things even exist, right? And so that denial of history, I always bring up that Gore Vidal quote, "We are the United States of amnesia. We learn nothing because we remember nothing." And so, I think to best sum up like a response to your question, I remember this one moment, just a very brief, casual moment, an encounter that I had with somebody in the art world. And this was over 10 years ago. Now that's a burden to carry this memory on my back. And I remember I had just installed my show, The Strangest Fruit, a series of 10 monumental paintings seen through a contemporary lens, but rooted very much so in the forgotten, if not erased, history of the lynchings of Mexicans and Mexican Americans in the American Southwest, particularly in Texas. And after installation, I walked into this person's office and sat down, and we were really good friends. And this person looked at me and just very casually, without even thinking twice, laughed from across the desk and said, "Are you an angry person? Why are you so angry?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean, angry?" He said, "Well, I look at this work and what are you so angry about?" And I said, "I'm not angry. I'm not angry at, this idea of, I'm not angry at the artwork. I'm not angry at the burden of being creative. It's none of that. If anything, I'm angry that you have no idea what there is to possibly be angry about, period," right? And there was such a disconnect, and I never forgot, and I always use these little moments like that, and I carry those with me because that's what really you know, not always in a positive way, but even on those days where, you know, it is hard to get up and to walk into the studio and say, here we go again. Like, you just have to keep chipping away because these stories need to be told, right? I mean, if we ever wanted to know what the end result was, the 4 generations of being miseducated, uninformed, to not care enough to be committed or involved, not only to your collective society, but to your fellow citizen and non-citizen. Here it is, right? This is what you get. And so that really to me is what is most challenging to me, not only as an artist, but as a human being, right? It's just to continue to find that motivation to consistently find enough reason to confront these subjects. I mean, trust me, there's days that I'd much rather be painting a vase of flowers, right, and blue skies. But you know, if the part of the artist's responsibility is being committed, not only to your own self, to your work, but to your community at large. And I really believe the artist has such a great commitment, a real responsibility to commit to an actively changing society.
Yeah, absolutely. Adriana?
Well, I think mine is just a slightly different perspective to, you know, in the book, like, by Elaine Scarry, and about pain and how we hold pain or trauma. I've always found that quite interesting, and it's not until recently that I've learned more about the first Surgeon General in California, Dr. Nadine Burke, and she's really studying the impacts of trauma to the body and how we hold trauma and how that also contributes to a lot of autoimmune deficiencies, and a lot of other health issues. But I think personally, the way that I work through it is similar to Vincent, that having the opportunity to take this kind of material back into the studio, like a writer or anybody else who wants to expand the knowledge of this information, I have a space to come back to and unpack it, even though it can be extremely heavy. So ways that I work through that is making the work and walking and writing about it. Because if we're just, for example, Requiem, it was, you know, all of those dates were hand carved, but it was me taking the time with each participant, submitting a text and a date to me, and me sitting down and reading it, and then trying to remember it and hold on to it. And so while I'm carving into the drywall, just thinking about that and holding it for some time, and then trying to allow myself to let that go, and then take the next opportunity to look at the next date, the next text. And so I find these moments within my process of holding and letting go, holding and letting go. And I have also a very ritualistic process of burning, which both Vincent and Denise have seen in person. And that's also another meditative space for me. Something that will take up to 3 hours, sometimes 4.5 hours, depending. but again, I use these moments of meditation and breathing to work through those things. And I think this depiction of pain, the depiction of violence, goes so far back. And so I think I'm interested also in how that also adds layers to the actual physical body. If I'm looking at a piece that I did not too long ago titled Unearthed Desenterrado, that was focusing on the Bracero program. And so using a cotton flag to illustrate what this program meant and leaving it outside and having it dematerialize and see the actual ailments just eat away at this fabric. We walk away in 3 months with, maybe just, what is it, a little bit less than half just dematerialized. And you think of a body, out there for over 15 years plus, and not only just in the fields working, but literally having to sometimes cross the border to get to that location or take a train to that location. And so I think all of this gets compounded by trying to understand more, and it just keeps leading me to that next point. But also giving myself those moments of being very thoughtful of how I hold it in my body, so that it doesn't just stay, but there is some kind of release as well.
Yeah, I was rereading, this sounds a weird statement, I was rereading the essay I wrote about your work that we had shared with all the students, and there's one of the quotes I use in it is by Elaine Scarry from The Body and Pain. And she says, whatever pain achieves, it achieves in part through its unshareability. And it ensures this unshareability through its resistance to language. Physical pain does not simply resist language, but actively destroys it, bringing about an immediate reversion to a state anterior to language, to the sounds and cries human beings make, a human being makes before language is learned. And I use that for your work because I think it's such a powerful statement in how hard it is to understand pain and how felt it is. And I think that's one of the reasons why art, even more so than writing, even though she writes that so eloquently, but art is also ineffable in that way. And I remember being in New Orleans with you, and you had just finished a piece where you were transferring the names of all of these women onto the wall and then burning all of those pieces of paper. And you're right, like I was so surprised by the process, because you think, you throw a bunch of paper in a barrel and you burn it and it's over with. But the fact that it burns slow, that you're constantly tending to it, and it almost reminds me of like how a body is washed after it's died, and like that there's a real sort of tenderness and ritual around that people don't get to see, but I think is still evident in the work in a kind of ineffable way.
Yeah. Which goes really also into Requiem. This was the first time that so for example, I took all the dates and the contributed texts.
Can you back up just a minute and just, for people who didn't get to see it, describe Requiem and even talk a little bit about how that collaboration came to be?
Yeah, I'll let Vince kick it off because it started with him.
Requiem originally started in 2012 as it was about a 6 by 5 foot graphite on paper, a drawing of a collapsing American eagle. I've always loved that word as title. Just to give you a little bit of brief insight about the way of how long sometimes I carry around these concepts with me. Sometimes specific ideas I will walk around, store them away in my mental vault for years and years before they um, reappear. But when I was in the 5th grade, I came across this book at my local library. Um, and I was obsessed with this book. And it was a beautiful, oversized book of photography by war correspondent Larry Burroughs. And the cover of it was a helmet, a soldier's helmet in the Ashal Valley, which was coined as Hamburger Hill in 1967 during the Vietnam War. Because I didn't have access to, I didn't know about the art section and who to turn to in terms of like what artists that would resonate with me. But this Larry Burroughs book, I just was obsessed. And I asked Santa to bring it to me for 4 years straight, and he never did. My poor parents, they must have been so confused, like, what the hell do you want with this book? It's really the way that I learned not only anatomy and how to draw a figure and texture and so forth, but how to compose an image so that it went so much further than just being a powerful image. And so fast forward 2012, I took this idea of this sort of these prescribed archetypes that portray nationalism, hyper-patriotism, right? Especially in the United States, but I was looking at throughout world history, throughout world civilizations, the use of the eagle, right? The symbology behind the eagle. We've seen it from the Egyptians, through Roman times, and so forth. And in America, during my lifetime, rarely are we ever encouraged to think critically beyond what we think we see, right? And so when you think about the eagle on the back of your quarters, on a dollar bill, on that presidential seal, in military emblems and patches, right? What does the eagle represent? Invulnerability, power, dominance, aggression, intimidation, glory, patriotism. So what happens if you just flip that, you reverse that sort of role of the symbol, right? What does that mean? And so that's exactly, it's as simple as that. I tried to create a counter image, right? To this icon. And so in the drawing, we see this collapsing American eagle who's gasping in the throes of its own sort of internal conflict. It was my response, my direct response to the way that I perceived an entire lifetime since the year I was born, 1977, of a nation at war, caught up in foreign conflict, but at war here at home with its own self. And so, on the heels of 9/11, invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan, with no end in sight, and with the American press and media and American society really not giving a damn about any of it, it was my way of countering that notion of the boogeyman. That outside threat is forever trying to steal your freedom and your way of life. But if you look at the drawing, the eagle is clawing its own self. There is no boogeyman. It is its own invisible threat, its own enemy. And because I work in such a very finely crafted, rendered method, I always see dimensionally anyway, and it had always been my dream to someday sculpt one of these things and bring it entirely to life in the 3-dimension. And so 5 or 6 years later, in 2017, I finally made that a reality and began a 3-year project. It took 3 years to sculpt this thing by hand. I think it weighed, what, 400 and something pounds. It was about 6 feet by 4 feet in diameter. And it quickly began to evolve into something, take on a much larger context, right? A much more powerful life form to it. And Adriana and I started having conversation. There's already so much parallel similarities, crossover between our methods of working, the way that we see and think. And so I don't specifically remember now the conversation we had, but it just organically, like many other things with her and I, just quickly mutated into something much, much larger and became a collaboration.
I'm just gonna let people know that I think we have to wrap up in a couple minutes. And this is like a perfect reason why this conversation is continuing, because we didn't even get to our written about topic, which is things that we're reading that influence what we're doing. So in the last couple minutes, is there anybody who has a question? And then I'll encourage you to do then we'll do the to be continued and then come to the next conversation. And we've left this cliffhanger of how Requiem haven't finished the story. So you have to come to hear how it ends.
With the last couple minutes, does anyone want to throw a question or a comment out there for them? Jules, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me? Is this loud enough? This is a long and open-ended question, so I'm sorry. But why did you choose art to kind of further this goal of social progress?
I couldn't hear.
Why
So,
did you
Leslie,
select art?
Why do you choose art as the vehicle for being able to talk about these things? Did I get that correct?
Yeah.
Great.
Adriana?
For me, this has been the best way that I can communicate and articulate those kind of histories and narratives that I'm interested in telling. I would have loved to have been an incredible writer, but I really have to work hard at writing. But I think it's this action of making and creating spaces for people to come and unpack. That's where I'm driven.
For me, art is a universal language. It transcends time and space. There's a reason that we are as fascinated by cave drawings from thousands of years ago, as much as equally as we are by contemporary art. Right? It is humans reporting, communicating their brief moments of existence in this place, and I think that you don't have to be of any sort of particular background, socially, politically, culturally, generationally, to understand it.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you everybody for listening. And we hope you'll come, because I've got so many more questions.
We'll need 2 hours.
Could I say one last little thing?
Yeah.
So if we're going to resume next time on Requiem for the students, if you get a chance, jump on the Google and look up at around like the year 2010 through 12, this phenomenon of birds falling out of the sky.
It's happening again.
Oh, is it?
It's happening again in the Southwest. Birds have been falling from the sky.
Know that. So check that out. That will give you, and then if you get a chance to look at the Requiem drawing, and that'll give us a good springboard to begin next time.
And you can also, if you go to the MASS MoCA website, or if you Google MASS MoCA Suffering from Realness, you can get to the website, and then you'll also see a link there to all of the texts that are part of the Requiem project. So. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having us and the invitation.